Hi everybody, Becky Strayer here from Naya Clinics. In today's video, I'll be talking about boundaries, what they are, and how to make sure that we're forming healthy boundaries. And I'll go into a little bit too of why it is so important for our own mental health to have healthy boundaries. So typically when we think of boundaries, most of the people I talk to, their thoughts automatically go to physical boundaries, where it's that personal bubble, that personal space, making sure that someone isn't standing too close to me in line or just giving me that space whenever I'm doing work on the computer and someone's right over my shoulder. Those kind of boundaries. But there's a lot more to boundaries than that. So first, let's break down boundaries, what they are and the common traits of the different types of boundaries. So yes, we do have physical boundaries, and that would be very much that personal space. There can also be even the environmental space as well. So for example, giving boundaries as far as to our adult children who might still live at home and making sure that we aren't going into their bedroom and looking through their items, things like that. That would be an example of physical boundaries. We also have intellectual boundaries, and that would be more of things like our thoughts, our beliefs about things. Typically, these boundaries are violated when someone is belittling or criticizing our beliefs about something instead of just listening. And with that too, that doesn't mean that the other person necessarily agrees with us, but they still give us the time and the respect to listen to what we believe, what our thoughts are. And another type of boundary would be emotional boundaries. Very similar to intellectual boundaries, but instead of it being about the thoughts, it's about our emotions. So, for example, I'm sharing with someone that I feel very sad about finding out that one of my friends was recently diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. And for them being like, well, it didn't happen to you, why are you so sad? You shouldn't be sad about that. That's not your problem. That would be a violation of my emotional boundaries, where they're belittling, criticizing, or just being disrespectful about my feelings. Again, not saying the other person has to agree with my feelings, however, they can still listen and show value to what I have to say and what I believe and feel as well. We also have time boundaries, and this is one that is very important that a lot of people forget. So time boundaries, I typically think of when you're trying to get out of the office and you have your coat on, you have your purse or your bag with you, you are walking out of the office. Now one coworker who doesn't really talk to you that much decides to tell you for an hour about their vacation plans for that summer. You're just like, I really want to get home. I appreciate that you want to build a relationship. That's great. But I have things I need to do. And just feeling like that isn't being respected necessarily. So that'd be an example of a little bit of a time boundary violation where there's a difference between, hey, how are you doing? I'm good. How are you? Talking for a few minutes versus I am taking up an hour and a half of your time talking only about me and not really respecting that you were trying to get out the door for some reason. There's also sexual boundaries, and that has anything to do with our sexual identity. So whether that is intimacy with a partner, our sexual identity as far as what we identify with, or our sexual preference, or just really anything dealing with sexuality in general, and people violating, being disrespectful, or saying hurtful things, not listening, not honoring when we say no, what we prefer, things like that. And then finally, the last form of boundary would be material boundaries. And that would be, for example, I'm going to probably lend my sister my car if she needed to. I'm not going to lend a stranger my car back. Or whenever letting your roommate borrow a pan and they return it all scratched up and somehow they burned the pan and things like that, they're like I'm not going to really trust you with my stuff anymore. Or having someone who repeatedly asks to borrow something that you don't feel comfortable with. That would be examples of material boundaries being violated. So those are the different types of boundaries. Now we have common traits to each boundary as well. So they're broken down into three types of traits. So we either have porous boundaries, which are typically, when we think of porous, typically porous is more like having holes in it, and so not really very healthy, not very strong boundaries, or very rigid boundaries on the other side of the spectrum, where it's too much, it's too big of a wall, very much avoidance. And then in the middle of it, kind of that balance between the two would be the healthy boundary, where we are aware of where they stand, but we're also able to respect other people's boundaries in the process, other people's needs as well. And so, for example, the porous boundary, that would be very much, typically we have porous boundaries when we are fearful of rejection, and so we avoid rejection by complying to what other people say or want. Typically with porous boundaries, we have a really hard time saying no to other people, typically are very over-involved, oversharing personal information, very much depending on other people's opinions of us for our own self-esteem. And we're very accepting of abuse or disrespect when we have porous boundaries. On the flip side of that, with more rigid boundaries, the reason for rigid boundaries is also to actually avoid rejection, but by having rigid boundaries, we avoid rejection by just purely not dealing with it whatsoever. So rigid boundaries would be saying no to everything, having very few relationships. And people with more rigid boundaries, I think of as the people that will never be the first to say I love you in a new romantic relationship. Things like that. They may seem a little bit detached, not really sharing things, very private. And then, again, the balance, the healthy boundaries, that would look more like knowing when to say no to something, but not always saying no to things. Share personal information in an appropriate manner where it's like that equal give and take. Not overly sharing, but also not undersharing. Not compromising your own values for others. And that's a big one that we see when boundaries are being violated, is that we are no longer following our own values, and rather we're listening to others and disregarding our own. In healthy boundaries, we value our own opinions, and we take that to heart as well. We give weight to our own feelings, our own opinions. We are aware of our values, our wants, our beliefs, and we know how to communicate that appropriately. And we can also accept when other people say no to us as well, and that's a form of healthy boundary as well. Keep in mind with boundaries that depending on the setting, this can change. So if I have a coworker who I'm also friends with, in the setting of working and being at work, that boundary is going to look a lot different than when we're hanging out on the weekend together. The things we talk about, the things that we share are going to look different as boundaries. Also keeping in mind too that cultural boundaries might be different as well. In different cultures they might look a little bit different. And that too, that depending on the type of relationship will change the boundaries. So for example, the relationship I have with my clients is going to look a lot different what a healthy boundary between my clients and myself are compared to my husband and me. Or even my parents compared to my friends, things like that. So keep that in mind as well. It isn't black and white necessarily. Now, if you are someone who's struggling with healthy boundaries, and keep in mind that boundaries aren't necessarily the easiest thing, so give yourself some credit there. But if you are someone who struggles with forming healthy boundaries, here are a couple tips to help with that. So the first one is to practice being assertive. So in doing this, it's asserting what you feel like you need or want. A lot of times we have unhealthy boundaries because we are trying to avoid hurting other people. In doing that, though, we aren't respecting ourselves. And then the more we assert our boundaries, the more other people around us know what to expect from us, and then that forms more trust within the relationship. So it's actually a positive thing. At first it feels uncomfortable, though, and it feels confrontational. And so making sure by being assertive, different things we can do. Keeping in mind body language accounts for 55% of communication. So even just by standing up straight, making good eye contact, having a clear tone of voice, staying calm during the conversation. Those are things that even without necessarily choosing your words correctly, this still show that you are being assertive in an appropriate manner. Other tips, making sure that you know what your values and beliefs are and that you're not compromising them. Being aware of, okay, if this is something I really value, I'm not going to disrespect myself over that. With that being said, we also want to make sure that A, we're respecting ourselves, but B, we are also respecting others. Um, that's part of that rigid boundary, is a lot of times we kind of are disrespecting other people in the process. And so making sure you're finding that balance of, yes, I can show my self-respect and I can show you respect as well. And finally, the last big way of forming healthy boundaries would be setting limits and being clear about what those limits are. And so a lot of times in our culture, out of not wanting to disappoint somebody or be disrespectful to someone, we don't give that clear answer. We don't say, no, I can't watch your dog for you this weekend. We say, I don't know, I'll get back to you. Let me see. Which sometimes we mean, but a lot of times it's our way of kind of dodging saying no in that moment. And so instead of trying to dodge it, it's okay for you to say, hey, I'm not able to this weekend, but in the future, let me know. And if I have enough time, I might be able to move around my schedule. Being clear about what is your ability, what are you able to do, and if you are busy, it's okay for you to say no. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. So keep those things in mind. Again, boundaries, it's not a black or white thing. There's a lot of gray area in between. But making sure that really at the end of the day that you're respecting your own boundaries, and having the people around you who care about you also respecting those, as well as you respecting others as well. I hope this helps, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Take care.